Hello students, welcome to Read Medprep Academy channel. Today in Ecosystem Part 2, we shall discuss about the functions of the ecosystem Part 1. In this we shall talk about the photosynthetically active radiation, productivity of an ecosystem, concept of trophic level in an ecosystem, energy flow, food chain and food web, and ecological pyramids. Function of ecosystem include to energy creation, sharing of energy and cycling of materials between the living and the non-living component of an ecosystem. Before studying the productivity of any ecosystem, we should understand the essential role of sunlight used by producers of the first trophic level. The quantity of sunlight is directly proportional to the production of energy by plants. In this image, you can see that the sunlight is absorbed by the producers. The producers are the plants and the other photosynthetic organisms which convert the light energy into the chemical energy. During this process, some amount of heat is evolved. And this chemical energy that is formed in the form of food in the plants is consumed by other animals and plants, and during such process again the heat is evolved. So the cycling of chemical nutrients occur in the ecosystem because of the absorption of sunlight. What is this photosynthetically active radiation, otherwise called PAR? The amount of light available for photosynthesis of plants is called photosynthetically active radiation or PAR, which is between the range of 400 to 700 nanometers wavelength. It is essential for the photosynthesis and plant growth. PAR is not always constant because of clouds, tree shades, air, dust particles, seasons, latitudes, and length of the daylight availability. Generally, plants absorb more blue and red light for efficient photosynthesis. Here in this image, you can see in the x-axis the wavelength of light and the y-axis the relative photosynthetic efficiency. Normally, the light absorbed is more on the blue and the red side. Between 400 to 700 nanometers it is absorbed, and the middle range, which is between 470 to 570, is not absorbed for photosynthesis. Of the total sunlight, 34% that reaches the atmosphere is reflected back into the atmosphere. Moreover, 10% is held by ozone, water vapors and atmospheric gases, and the remaining 56% reaches the Earth's surface. Out of the 56% that reaches the Earth's surface, only 2 to 10% of the solar energy is used by the green plants for photosynthesis, while the remaining portion is dissipated as heat. Here in this image, you can see that some sunlight is bounced back into the space. Some heat is released into the space. Some heat is naturally kept by the gases in the air like water vapor. Extra heat is kept in the air by greenhouse gases produced from human activity. Less heat is able to be released into the space. PAR is generally reported as millimoles per square meter per second by using silicon photovoltaic detectors, which detect only 400 to 700 nanometers wavelength of light. PAR values range from 0 to 3000 millimoles per square meter per second. At night, PAR is 0, and during midday in the summer, the PAR often reaches 2000 to 3000 millimoles per square meter per second. Here, the silicon photovoltaic detectors or light sensors, when the light falling on a PN junction, can be used to generate electricity from the light energy, as in a solar cell. Small devices used as sensors are called photodiodes. You can see the image on the right side. Fast acting, but the voltage produced is not linearly related to the light intensity. Now, what are the types of carbon? Green carbon, grey carbon, blue carbon, brown carbon, black carbon. Green carbon is a carbon stored in the biosphere by the process of photosynthesis. Here you can see the path of carbon in photosynthesis. The light that is absorbed in the presence of carbon dioxide is converted into food, and the carbon is used in the manufacture of simple metabolites like sugars, starch, cellulose, fatty acids, lipids, amino acids, proteins. It also helps in the production of secondary metabolites like isoprenoids, terpenes, carotenoids, sterols, chlorophylls, phenylpropanoids, phenolic acids, flavonoids, lignins, glycosides and alkaloids. During the process of photosynthesis, water and minerals are absorbed from the soil, and utilization of carbon dioxide helps also in the release of oxygen into the atmosphere. What is grey carbon? Carbon stored in the fossil fuels like the coal, oil and biogas deposits in the lithosphere. How coal is formed? Swamp 300 million years ago, before the dinosaurs, many giant plants died in the swamps. The water that is present showing lot of dead plants and animals about 100 million years ago were buried underwater, and the right image you can see the heat and pressure turns the dead plants that are present in the terrain of the land into the coal. Oil and natural gas formation, ocean 300 to 400 million years ago, tiny sea plants and animals that died and were buried on the ocean floor. Over time, they were covered by layers of silt and sand. In the ocean, over millions of years ago, around 50 to 100 million years ago, the remains were buried deeper and deeper. The enormous heat and pressure turned them into oil and gas. Today, we drill down through the layers of the sand, silt and rock to reach the rock formation that contains abundant amount of oil and gas deposits. What is blue carbon? Carbon stored in the atmosphere and the oceans. You can see the mangroves, the salt marsh that produce a lot of sediments, the seagrass, the coral reefs in the oceans. All these cause carbon sequestration. Carbon sequestration is carbon stored in the soils plus carbon stored in the biomass. The carbon is also released into the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide. What is brown carbon? Carbon stored in the industrialized forests, wood used in making commercial articles. So the carbon is taken up by the plants and stored in the plants from the atmosphere as well as by the roots. And the carbon is also released into the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide during respiration. So it's a natural boom and bust cycle of the forest carbon. Carbon is also released by the decomposition and storage of the dead trees. Carbon is again taken up by the newly growing plants and trees. What is black carbon? Carbon emitted from gas, diesel engine and coal-fired power plants. In this image, you can see the power plants releasing lot of polluted carbon into the atmosphere. What is the productivity of an ecosystem? The rate of biomass production per unit area in a unit time is called productivity. It can be expressed in terms of gram per meter square per year or kcal per meter square per year. It is classified as primary productivity, secondary productivity and community productivity. The primary productivity, the chemical energy or organic matter generated by the autotrophs during the process of photosynthesis and chemosynthesis is called primary productivity. It is a source of energy for all organisms from bacteria to human. What is gross primary productivity? The total amount of food energy or organic matter or biomass produced in an ecosystem by autotrophs through the process of photosynthesis is called GPP, gross primary productivity. What is this net primary productivity, NPP? The proportion of energy which remains after respiration loss in the plant is called net primary productivity. It is also called as apparent photosynthesis. Thus, the difference between GPP and respiration is known as NPP. So, NPP is equal to GPP minus respiration. NPP of the whole biosphere is estimated to be about 170 billion tons dry weight per year, out of which NPP of oceanic producers is only 55 billion tons per year in unit time. Here in this image you can see the primary productivity. For example, the gross primary production may be 300 joules and the net primary production is only 200 joules and the loss is by respiration which is around 100 joules. What is secondary productivity? The amount of energy stored in the tissues of heterotrophs or consumers is called secondary productivity. Gross secondary productivity is equivalent to the total amount of plant material that is ingested by the herbivores minus the materials lost as feces. What is the net secondary productivity? Storage of energy or biomass by the consumers per unit area per unit time after respiratory loss is called net secondary productivity. Here in this image you can see the gross secondary production is around 200 joules and the net secondary production is formed by minusing the respiration from the gross secondary production. Here in this image you can see the net secondary production is feces is 100 joules and tissue is 33 joules and the loss from cell respiration is around 67 joules. What is community productivity? The rate of net synthesis of organic matter or biomass by a group of plants per unit area per unit time is known as community productivity. Here you can see in this image on the right side, the sunlight produces 17 lakhs kilocalories per meter square per year. And this is utilized by the primary producers for the production of food. And this is consumed by the primary consumers, then the secondary consumers, then the tertiary consumers and the decomposers. So the total heat and respiration loss is around 20,810. So this shows that the total biomass that is produced in the community is called the community productivity. That shows also the loss by heat and respiration. The processes that are involved in the heat transfer or the energy transfer is the photosynthesis, digestion, assimilation and growth, excretion and death and respiration. The various trophic level organisms like the producers, the herbivores, the primary carnivores, the secondary carnivores and the detrivores produce only 10% of the energy and 90% is lost, and that heat is unavailable for further energy transfer by respiration and other processes. What are the factors that affect the primary productivity? Depends upon the plant species of an area, their photosynthetic capacity, availability of nutrients, solar radiation, precipitation, soil type, topographic factors like the altitude, latitude, direction and other environmental factors. It varies in different types of ecosystems. The productivity of different ecosystems is not determined by the size and number of population, but by the rate of total fixation of the radiant energy. Generally, the average world net primary productivities of an open ocean and tropical rainforest are maximum among the aquatic and the terrestrial ecosystems respectively. Here you can see in this image the average world net primary production of various ecosystems. The open oceans and the tropical rainforests have maximum productivity, whereas the extreme deserts have most minimum productivity in billion kilocalories per year. The concept of trophic level in an ecosystem. The Greek word trophic means to food or feeding. A trophic level refers to the position of an organism in the food chain. The number of trophic levels is equal to the number of steps in the food chain. The green plants, called the producers, occupy the first trophic level, T1. They are called the producers because they produce food from the process of photosynthesis. The energy produced by the producers is utilized by the plant eaters or the herbivores. They are called the primary consumers and occupies the second trophic level, T2. Herbivores were eaten by the carnivores, which occupy the third trophic level, T3. They are also called secondary consumers or primary carnivores. Carnivores are eaten by other carnivores which occupy the fourth trophic level, T4. They are called the tertiary consumers or the secondary carnivores. Some organisms which eat both plants and animals are called as omnivores. Example, crow. Such organisms may occupy more than one trophic level in the food chain. Here you can see the diagrammatic representation of the trophic levels. The first trophic level, T1, or the producers are the plants, which are otherwise the autotrophs. The second trophic level, T2, the primary consumers. Here the example is a rabbit, which is a herbivore. You can see the T3, which is the third trophic level, otherwise the secondary consumers. Here the example given is the snake, which is a primary carnivore. T4, the fourth trophic level of the tertiary consumers, is otherwise the secondary carnivore. Here the example given is the eagle. Omnivore or crow consumes the plants as well as the animals. Now let us move on to the energy flow. The transfer of energy in an ecosystem between trophic levels can be determined as energy flow. It is the key function in an ecosystem. Part of the energy obtained from the sun by the producer is transferred to the consumers and the decomposers through each trophic level, while some amount of energy is dissipated in the form of heat. Energy flow is always unidirectional in an ecosystem. Here you can see the diagrammatic representation of energy flow. The plants or the autotrophs absorb the sunlight and produce the food, and some amount of heat is lost during the production, and these plants are consumed by the herbivores, and the herbivores are consumed by the carnivores. Carnivores undergo death and decay and are destroyed by the decomposers. During each stage, the formation of food or the herbivore consumption of the plants or the carnivores or the decomposers, heat is lost into the atmosphere. Now, let us move on to the laws of thermodynamics. The storage and loss of energy in an ecosystem is based on two basic laws of thermodynamics. First law of thermodynamics, it states that energy can be transmitted from one system to another in various forms. Energy cannot be destroyed or created, but it can be transformed from one form to another. As a result, the quantity of energy present in the universe is constant. When you take the first law of thermodynamics, in a food chain, light is changed to chemical energy through photosynthesis, and is transferred again as a chemical energy to an herbivore and then carnivore. The energy at one level must come from the previous level. Hence, the first law of thermodynamics explains why the energy pyramids is always bigger on the bottom than on the top. Example, in photosynthesis, the product of starch, which is the chemical energy, is formed by the combination of reactants like the chlorophyll, water, carbon dioxide. The energy stored in starch is acquired from the external sources like the light energy, and so there is no gain or loss in total energy. Here the light energy is converted into chemical energy. Example, you can see here 6 molecules of carbon dioxide combined with 6 molecules of water in the presence of light and the pigment chlorophyll in the leaves form C6H12O6, which is starch, and 6 molecules of oxygen are released into the atmosphere. So the light energy is converted into chemical energy by the plants. Now let us move on to the second law of thermodynamics. It states that energy transformation results in the reduction of the free energy of the system. Usually energy transformation cannot be 100% efficient. As energy is transferred from one organism to another in the form of food, a portion of it is stored as energy in the living tissue, whereas a large part of energy is dissipated as heat through respiration. So the transfer of energy is irreversible natural process. Example, the 10% law. Here you can see in this image, the energy from the sun is utilized in the conversion to chemical energy. And the producers, for example, produce around 10,000 kilocalories, and this is consumed by the primary consumers, and during that process there is loss of heat, and the primary consumers, which are formed, have only 1000 kilocalories, are consumed by the secondary consumers, and 90% of heat is lost, and the secondary consumers are consumed by the tertiary consumers, and 90% of the heat is lost, and only 10% is consumed by the tertiary consumers. This is the energy flow at various trophic levels. The 10% law was proposed by Lindemann in 1942. It states that during transfer of food energy from one trophic level to another, only about 10% stored at every level, and rest of them 90% is lost in respiration, decomposition, and in the form of heat. Hence the law is called 10% law. Example, it is shown that of the 1000 joules of solar energy trapped by the producers, 100 joules of energy is stored as chemical energy through photosynthesis. The remaining 900 joules would be lost in the environment. In the next trophic level, herbivores which feed on the producers get only 10 joules of energy, and the remaining 90 joules is lost in the environment. Likewise, in the next trophic level, the carnivores which eat the herbivores store only 1 joule of energy, and the remaining 9 joules is dissipated. Finally, the carnivores are eaten by the tertiary consumers, which store only 0.1 joule of energy, and the remaining 0.9 joule is lost in the environment. Thus, at successive trophic level, only 10% of energy is stored. Here in this pyramid, you can see that 1000 joules of energy of sunlight is absorbed by the producers, and only 100 joules of food material is prepared having that amount of energy, and 900 joules of energy is lost. This 100 joules of energy that is consumed by the primary consumers, in which they give only 10%, that means 10 joules to the secondary consumers, and only 90 joules of energy is lost. The secondary consumers again, they lose 9 joules and give only 1 joule to the tertiary consumers, and the tertiary consumers have energy of only 0.1%, and 0.9% of joule of energy is lost. Now, what is food chain? The movement of energy from producers up to top carnivores is known as food chain. That is, in any food chain, energy flows from producers to primary consumers, then from primary consumers to secondary consumers, and finally secondary consumers to tertiary consumers. Hence, it shows linear network links. Here you can see the food chain, where the producer here is the grass, which is consumed by the grasshopper, which is the primary consumer, and the grasshoppers are taken up by the bluebirds, which are the secondary consumers, and the secondary consumers or the bluebirds are eaten up by the snakes, which is the tertiary consumer, and the tertiary consumers are eaten up by the apex predators or the quaternary consumers, owl. And finally, the dead and decaying of the owl are destroyed by the decomposers, which supplies nutrition to the growing grass or the producer. Generally, there are two types of food chain: grazing food chain and detritus food chain. What is this grazing food chain? The main source of energy for the grazing food chain is the sun. It begins with the first link, producers, that is the plants. The second link in the food chain is the primary consumers, for example the mouse, which get their food from producers. The third link in the food chain is the secondary consumers, for example the snake, which get their food from the primary consumers. The fourth link in the food chain is the tertiary consumers, example the eagle, which get their food from the secondary consumers. Here in this image, which is a diagrammatic representation of the grazing food chain, you can see the sun energy is utilized by the grass for the production of food, and this is consumed by the mouse, which is the primary consumer. This mouse is consumed by the snake, which is the secondary consumer, and the snake is consumed by the eagle, which is a tertiary consumer. Now, what is this detritus food chain? This type of food chain begins with the dead organic matter, which is an important source of energy. A large amount of organic matter derived from the dead plants, animals, and their excreta. This type of food chain is present in all ecosystems. The transfer of energy from the dead organic matter is transferred through series of organisms called detritus consumers or detritivores, then the small carnivores, then the large carnivores that are present on the top of the pyramid with repeated eating and being eaten respectively. This is called detritus food chain. Here in this image, you can see the diagrammatic representation of the detritus food chain, where the fallen leaves and twigs undergo decomposition, forming the detritus. This is consumed by the earthworm, which are called the detritivores, and the earthworms are picked up by the birds and they are eaten by them. They are the small carnivores, and these smaller birds are eaten up by the larger animals like the hawk, which is the top carnivore. What is a food web? The interlocking pattern of a number of food chains form a web like arrangement called the food web. It is the basic unit of an ecosystem. To maintain its stability in nature, it is called homeostasis. Example, in a grazing food chain of a grassland, in the absence of a rabbit, a mouse may also eat food grains. The mouse in turn may be eaten directly by a hawk or by a snake, and the snake may be directly eaten by the hawks. Here you can see a food web where the producers are the plants. The plants may be consumed by the grasshopper. The grasshopper may be directly picked up by the hawks, or the grasshopper may be eaten by the lizards, and the lizards may be killed and eaten by the hawks. The rabbits sometimes eat the food materials from the producers, and they can be directly be killed and eaten up by the hawks. The mouse which consume the plants can be directly eaten by the snakes, and the snakes are picked up and eaten by the hawks. or the mouse can be directly picked up and eaten by the hawks. So it forms a web. That is why it's called a food web. Hence, this interlocking pattern of food chains is the food web, and the species of an ecosystem may remain balanced to each other by some sort of natural check. What is the significance of food web? Food web is constructed to describe species interaction called direct interaction. It can be used to illustrate indirect interactions among the different species. It can also be used to study the bottom-up or top-down control of community structure. It can be used to reveal different patterns of energy transfer in terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. Now let us move on to the ecological pyramids. The graphic representation of the trophic structure and function at successive trophic levels of an ecosystem is called ecological pyramids. The concept of ecological pyramids was introduced by Charles Elton in 1927. Thus, they are also called as Eltonian pyramids. There are three types of ecological pyramids: pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass, and pyramid of energy. Pyramid of number, a graphical representation of the number of organisms present at each successive trophic level in an ecosystem, is called pyramids of number. There are three different shapes of pyramids: upright, spindle, and inverted. Upright pyramids, there is a gradual decrease in the number of organisms in each trophic level from producers to the primary consumers, and then to the secondary consumers, and finally to the tertiary consumers. Therefore, pyramids of number in grassland and pond ecosystem are always upright. Here you can see in this image, on the left side is the grassland ecosystem, and on the right side is the pond ecosystem. And the T1 are the producers, the T2 are the herbivores or the primary consumers, T3 is the carnivores or the secondary consumers, and the top of the pyramid is the top carnivores or T4 level, which is called the tertiary consumers. The different organisms at different levels vary depending upon the different type of ecosystems. So what are spindle pyramids? In a forest ecosystem, the pyramid of number is somewhat different in shape. It is because the base T1 of the pyramid occupies large-sized trees or the producers, which are lesser in number. Herbivores, T2, fruit-eating birds, elephants, deers, animals occupying the second trophic level are more in number than the producers. In the final trophic level T4, the tertiary consumers, lion, are lesser in number than the secondary consumers T3, like the fox and the snake. Therefore, the pyramid of number in forest ecosystem looks spindle-shaped. Here in this image, you can see the spindle-shaped pyramid where the number T1 and T4 are comparatively very less, and T3 is lesser than the number of organisms that are present at the T2 level. T1 are the producers, T2 are the primary consumers or the herbivores, T3 are the secondary consumers, and T4 are the tertiary consumers. Now, what is the inverted pyramid? The pyramid of number in a parasite ecosystem is always inverted because it starts with a single tree. Therefore, there is a gradual increase in the number of organisms in successive trophic levels from producer to tertiary consumers. Here in this image, you can see the inverted pyramid of number. The apex is the producers, above is herbivores, above them are the parasites, and above them are the hyperparasites. The hyperparasites are excess in number. Here to sum up the types of pyramid of numbers, A and B are the upright pyramids. A is the grassland ecosystem and B is the pond ecosystem. The C is the spindle-shaped pyramid, which is the forest ecosystem. And D is the inverted pyramid or the parasite ecosystem. Now, pyramid of biomass, a graphical representation of the amount of organic material, that is called the biomass, present at each successive trophic level in an ecosystem, is called pyramid of biomass. In grassland and forest ecosystems, there is a gradual decrease in biomass of organisms at successive trophic levels from producers to top carnivores or the tertiary consumers. Therefore, these two ecosystems, grassland and forest ecosystems, show pyramids as upright pyramids of biomass. Here you can see in this image the upright pyramids of biomass. On the left side is the grassland ecosystem, which is A, and on the right side is the forest ecosystem marked as B. T1 are the producers, T2 are the primary consumers, T3 are the secondary consumers and T4 are the tertiary consumers. The different organisms vary depending upon the type of the ecosystem. However, in pond ecosystem, the bottom of the pyramid is occupied by the producers, which comprise very small organisms possessing the least biomass, and so the value gradually increases towards the tip of the pyramid. Therefore, the pyramid of biomass is always inverted in shape in a pond ecosystem. Here you can see a pond ecosystem with the inverted pyramid where T1 are the producers, T2 are the primary consumers, and the T3 are the secondary and the tertiary consumers, and the T1 are large in number. Here to sum up, you can see the pyramids of biomass, which is the dry weight per unit area in different types of ecosystems. A is the upright pyramid of grassland, B is the upright pyramid of the forest ecosystem, and C is the inverted pyramid of the pond ecosystem. Now, what is pyramid of energy? A graphical representation of energy flow at each successive trophic level in an ecosystem is called pyramids of energy. The bottom of the pyramid of energy is occupied by the producers, and there is a gradual decrease in energy transfer at successive trophic levels from producers to the upper levels. Therefore, the pyramid of energy is always upright. Here in this image, you can see that the pyramids of energy, which is represented in kilocalories per unit per area per unit time in any ecosystem. So, there is loss of 90% of energy from each trophic level, from the producers to the primary consumers, from the primary consumers to the secondary consumers, from the secondary consumers to the tertiary consumers. So today in ecosystem part 2, we discussed about the functions of the ecosystem part 1. In this we talked about the photosynthetically active radiation, productivity of an ecosystem, concept of trophic level in an ecosystem, energy flow, food chain and food web, and ecological pyramids. Thank you. Kindly subscribe, like, share and comment the channel Read Medprep Academy. Log on to www.readmedprepacademy.com for MCQs. Facebook ID is Read Medprep Academy. Our email is readmedprepacademy@gmail.com. Our Instagram is Read Medprep Academy. Join Read Medprep Academy for PG and UG preparation for medical entrance examinations. Post your questions in the comment box. We will reply with appropriate answers. Thank you very much.